We start with a promise from Syria's interim President Ahmad al-Sharaa to protect the rights of the Druze religious minority in his country's south. That follows, of course, a deadly outbreak of sectarian violence. War monitors say the clashes involving Druze, Bedouin tribes and government forces resulted in more than 500 deaths. A US-brokered ceasefire is in a fragile state amid reports of fresh fighting in the Druze heartland province of Sweida. Government troops have reportedly left the area. Syria's leader accuses Israel of trying to destabilize his country by intervening in the unrest. Israel bombed the capital Damascus on Wednesday, saying it was acting to protect its Druze allies. Meanwhile, the European Union has weighed in, urging Israel to immediately cease its strikes on Syrian territory.
The Defense Ministry building in Damascus, heavily damaged from an Israeli strike. Broadcast by state media, live on air. Israel says the strike was in response to days of deadly fighting in the southern city of Sweida, where the Druze, an Arabic-speaking ethno-religious minority, and Sunni Bedouin tribes were involved in armed clashes. Syrian government troops intervened, officially to stop the violence, but witnesses say government forces joined the Bedouin in attacking Druze fighters and civilians. In a televised address, Syria's interim president said anyone who transgressed would be held accountable.
I especially address our Druze brethren, who are an integral part of this nation's fabric. Syria will never be a place for division, fragmentation, or sectarian strife. We affirm that protecting your rights and freedoms is among our top priorities. We reject any attempt, foreign or domestic, to sow division within our ranks.
Damascus accuses Israel of trying to divide the country. Israel, which has for months demanded the south of Syria remain a demilitarized zone, says it acted to enforce this demand and to protect the Druze.
We've set forth a clear policy: demilitarization of the region south of Damascus, from the Golan Heights and to the Druze mountain area. That's number one. Number two is protecting the brothers of our brothers, the Druze, in the Druze mountain. Both were broken by the regime in Damascus. We will not allow Syrian army forces to enter the region south of Damascus, and we will not allow any harm to the Druze at the Druze mountain.
Syrian troops withdrew from Sweida following the ceasefire between the government forces and Druze fighters. And while the ceasefire between those two parties held, Bedouin tribes were seen fleeing as state media reported revenge attacks against them. A war monitor said several Bedouin civilians were killed by Druze fighters. Bedouin clans, who had earlier fought with government forces against Druze fighters, vowed to strike back, saying the truce only applied to government forces. Tit-for-tat violence that threatens to ignite yet another cycle of sectarian bloodshed.
Stephen Heydemann is a professor of Middle East Studies at Smith College in the United States. He has a special focus on Syria and authoritarian governance. He joins us from Northampton in the US state of Massachusetts. Welcome to DW. How deep do these sectarian enmities between the Druze and Bedouins, and indeed others, how deep do they run?
The sectarian tensions between Bedouin and Druze in Syria go back quite a long way, but escalated significantly during the period of the Syrian war, of the Syrian conflict. A number of Bedouin tribes associated with the Assad regime and had tribal fighters who fought alongside regime forces in Druze areas of Syria. And there were also members of Bedouin tribes who affiliated with some of the extremist Islamist groups that were working to gain a foothold in Druze majority areas in the south, often through very violent means. And so for both of those reasons, the relationship between the communities is tense. and has led to clashes before this most recent eruption of violence over the years.
And they were, as you say, this goes back a long way, even before the Assad regime. So the chances of this new interim government, which hasn't yet fully established its legitimacy, the chances of them getting these factions in what was a semi-autonomous part of the country, the chances of them getting them to behave themselves and make peace seem vanishingly small.
I think the odds of an agreement that would stabilize the situation in the South differ significantly depending on the community that is at the heart of ongoing discussions with the central government. The Druze community, for instance, which is very anxious to defend its autonomy and has been reluctant to place fighters under the authority of the central government, has agreed to a ceasefire, and it seems as if violence on the part of Druze forces has been reduced virtually to nothing. What is disturbing is that spokespeople for the Bedouin tribes have said that the ceasefire applies only to government forces that were sent into the south some days ago and not to tribal forces, not to Bedouin forces. And if that becomes a starting point for a renewal of confrontations, then yes, indeed, I think we will see that the central government confronts some significant challenges in trying to stabilize the situation and secure an understanding that encompasses all of the factions in the South. Israel is a wild card in this, of course, because it's entirely possible that if further clashes break out, Israel's intervention will resume and perhaps even escalate beyond what we've already seen.
And what's Israel up to here? Is it really concerned about Syria's Druze minority, as it claims, or is there, as so many people seem to think, a different agenda?
Israel has multiple agendas in southern Syria. There's no question about that. I think we should not discount too heavily its claims to serve as the protector of the Druze. The Israeli government is under enormous pressure from its own Druze population to play that role. But at the same time, I think its principal interest is in establishing its authority over southern areas in Syria to prevent them from becoming what it views as a base for forces that might launch attacks against Israeli territory. Now, that justification, I think, comes into a certain amount of question when we recognize that the central government in Damascus has done nothing and said nothing that would imply that it has any kind of hostile intentions toward Israel. In fact, just the opposite. It has gone much further than the Assad regime had in the last 15 years toward trying to find some kind of security accommodation with Israel. And so the idea that Israel's presence in southern Syria, on the scale that we've seen, which is significant, is needed to deter a threat from Damascus doesn't really stand up, given the much more conciliatory attitude that the al-Sharaa government has taken toward Israel.
So now that we have this conciliatory attitude from the interim government, now that the interim government has withdrawn, as Israel demanded, from the south of Syria, is that it for Damascus? Is that game over? Do they leave the south of Syria to Druze and to Israel? Or do they challenge Israel's authority in their own country?
My sense is that we're likely to see a pause in efforts by the central government to extend its authority more fully into the south. After establishing this ceasefire, President al-Sharaa said that the Syrian government would respect the rights of its Druze citizens, which suggests that it is prepared for now to accept a measure of autonomy in Druze majority areas in the south. But I think we have to anticipate that it will continue over time to push for the complete, or at least deeper integration of southern areas into the authority of the central government. I don't think that project is over, but I think it will proceed more slowly, and it will certainly have to take Israel into account as that process unfolds.
Okay, thanks for guiding us through that so clearly. Stephen Heydemann from Smith College in the United States.
And our coverage continues now with the Middle East expert and professor for international relations, Fawaz Gerges from the London School of Economics. Professor, it's good to have you with us. Let me ask you about what the United States is saying about this. It says that all parties have agreed to implement steps towards ending the violence. Do we know what these steps could be?
Well, thanks for having me. I think what the United States has been doing is try to basically bring about a ceasefire. The U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has made it very clear that he personally communicated with the Israeli and the Syrian leaders. At the end of the day, what the United States wants is a ceasefire. It wants a permanent ceasefire. It wants to prevent escalation between Israel and Syria. And it wants, of course, to prevent any kind of mass killings of the Druze minority in Syria.
Mm-hmm. The Syrian government, its forces, they've withdrawn from Sweida. The interim president in Syria has announced that responsibility for security in Sweida will be handed over to religious elders and some local factions. This sounds like Israel effectively got what it wanted.
In a certain way, you're absolutely correct. Israel basically attacked Syrian forces dozens of times in the past few days. The Syrian government basically incurred some major losses. At the end of the day, also, the Syrian President Ahmad al-Sharaa made it very clear in a speech, as you reported, that basically the choice faced the Syrian government was either strategic escalation, which will come at the cost of the well-being of the Druze community, or de-escalation. The Syrian government decided to de-escalate and pull out its forces from Sweida, and its decision, I believe, will have major consequences both at home in Syria and beyond Syria as well.
Yeah, Israel is demanding the entire south of Syria be demilitarized. Is the Syrian government's withdrawal from Sweida, is it a first step towards that?
Let me basically contextualize your question. Mm-hmm. Since the fall of Assad in December 2024, Israel has bombed Syria almost continuously. It has destroyed the military capabilities of Syria. It does not really want the Syrian new government to basically have any potent or effective military force. So the Israeli attacks on Syria have never stopped. What we have seen in the past few days is escalation, because Israel wants to come across as portray itself as a defender of the Druze community, a small minority in Syria, and you have also a major Druze community in Israel as well. At the end of the day, what we are witnessing is that Israel is trying to prevent the Syrian government from having any presence in the south of this country, and the attacks in Sweida basically have given Israel a pretext to do so.
And I'm wondering, Professor, could the withdrawal that we're seeing, could it embolden the diverse factions that are operating in Syria and effectively weaken the interim government in Damascus?
I have no doubts in my mind that what has happened in the past few days, it has undermined the authority and the credibility of the new Syrian government. It has prevented the Syrian government from expanding its authority to Sweida. It has undermined the legitimacy of the government in the eyes of many Syrians. There is a widespread perception that the Syrian government is not really broadly based. It's not inclusive. And in fact, I would not be surprised if Ahmad al-Sharaa, the president, faces a major reckoning within his own Islamist base of support, in particular from the hardliners. And the big lesson for the Kurds of course, who control the eastern part, the northeastern part, is that, well, they will most likely maintain their separate enclave. Because if the Syrian government cannot take on the Druze community, surely it cannot take on the Kurds, who are much more powerful than the Druze community in Syria.
And also, the United States and the European Union, they have put a lot of diplomatic capital into this new government in Syria, into stabilizing this new Syrian government. Considering what Israel has done in the past few days, could Israel be on a collision course with its most important allies?
One, as you know, has been talking about the likelihood of normalization between Israel and Syria. Some major talks have taken place behind closed doors between the Syrian officials and the Israeli officials, and the United States has been a major interlocutor in trying to bridge the divide between Syria and Israel. What has happened in the past few days, I think Israel, in a stroke, has turned Syria from a potential neutral neighbor into a bitter enemy. I had never seen the president of Syria, al-Sharaa, talks about Israel in such hostile terms and threatening basically that if Israel continues its attacks on Syria, the Syrian government could really engage the Syrian forces. At the end of the day, the big question, both the regional powers and the European powers and the United States have embraced the new government. They were hoping that the new government become more stable, more secure, more inclusive. What we have seen in the past few weeks, not just in Sweida, is basically the Syrian government without an inclusive political process. Syria could easily descend into all-out violence in the next few weeks and next few months.
Professor Gerges, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We appreciate you also putting these events into important context for us. Thank you.